Welcome to the Medical Sales Accelerator podcast. I'm Zed Williamson.
And I'm Clark Wiederhold.
This podcast exists to put scale to the value you get from those great one-to-one conversations at sales meetings and conferences.
You've been told the customer is always right. That is rarely true.
That's why we're speaking with our guest today, Brent Adamson, a world-renowned researcher, trainer, B2B advisor, and co-author of best-selling books, The Challenger Sale and The Challenger Customer. Brent, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, guys. It's great to be with you.
So, the customer is not always right, huh?
No, but we wouldn't have to be in sales if we didn't think that was true. But you know, we can go back, I don't know, 15 years ago when we first wrote Challenger work and pick it up from there. But there's so I've been doing this. I had a career before this. That's a whole nother podcast. But for the last 20 years or so, at least, I've been involved in doing some pretty in-depth research on B2B selling, B2B marketing, and really more recently B2B buying, and trying to understand B2B buying behavior and how customer buying groups make decisions and ultimately therefore make purchases. And something has become pretty clear, no matter what angle we've taken in that research over the years, it's become pretty clear that one is more likely to not only succeed in sales, but more likely, I think, and maybe more importantly, to differentiate yourself, to show up differently to the customer. If you start with the posture, not so much that the customer is always right, but maybe that the customer is not always right, that they've missed something. So, for example, in the Challenger work, and I know particularly in med device, the Challenger work is kind of everywhere, right? So the heart and soul of Challenger is this idea that you can show up to a customer conversation with a perspective not on your business, but a new perspective on their business, a new way to make money, save money, mitigate risk. And sort of the heart and soul of Challenger was always this idea that what if it were true that maybe you actually know the customer's business better than they know it themselves? At least that part of business speaks to your capability. I always found, by the way, in med device, that was always a little scary because you're selling to surgeons. You know what I mean? You're selling to people who have like beating hearts literally in their hands, and you want to show up and say there's a better way to do that. It's like good luck. You say so. I totally appreciate, particularly in med device, when you're working with medical doctors in particular. But I know there's other parts of med device and where it touches, but nonetheless, it always felt a bit of an uphill climb to say, how can I, as a quote unquote just a sales rep, show up and tell a medical doctor how to do a certain treatment better? But I think also your audience would probably know that actually is true, right? Given at least not you as an individual, but certainly you as an organization, as a capability, as a product, have a more research, a more nuanced take on how to provide a certain procedure or something like that, or how to mitigate infection, or how, all the things you guys know that I don't, right? But it's like, that's the posture of understanding your customer's business better than they know it themselves. Now, if you fast forward to where I've been working in the last 10 years or so, and I'll take a breath to get your thoughts on this, but I think there's a whole nother set of dimensions along which customers equally struggle, or at least or along which there's equal opportunities to teach customers something new. And when you put it all together, I think it's this really interesting story of episode after episode of this, like the TV series. Customers don't really know what they're doing.
So there's a lot to unpack there. But it's very true. And the idea that there's a surgeon who has, safety in mind and years of learning, it can actually be a detriment to that person's ability to be open to new things. It's
100%.
The idea of, in this organization, we basically have a rule. If you ever consider yourself an expert, this is not the place for you, because we feel that experts tend to believe that they have nothing else to learn.
Right.
And so there's value in someone understanding, hey, I can know more about your business than you do because I have this broader perspective. And I think that it makes complete sense to me.
Well, let me give you a couple more dimensions along which customers struggle and see you get your guys' reaction to this. So I think particularly in med device, or particularly in the medical field, especially in the United States today, just given how medical care operates here, it's probably globally true as well, but is another dimension along which many customers don't understand their own business very well is how to navigate their own internal decision-making processes, right? So we talked before about what to buy, how to mitigate risk, how to make money, save money, mitigate, all that kind of stuff. But another one is like, who should I even talk to, right? And I think particularly in this case, this is where it gets especially interesting. This leads into this whole body of work we did at Gartner and CEB before that around this idea of what we called buyer enablement, right? So if I'm a surgeon, I'm trying to save lives. I'm trying I'm scrubbed up. I'm in the OR. I've got people's guts in my hands, not to be graphic, but and now someone says, could you please go talk to procurement and sign this? It's like, what? I know I'm not doing that. It's like, I'm trying to save this freaking life. It's like, but then it's like, I got to go talk to, now the lawyers have got questions. Oh my God, this new robotic arm's got some data issues. I'm not a data guy. I'm trying to, and so I think it's even like this person who's been to college for 15 years and has $400 million worth of debt and has just saved 6 lives before breakfast, doesn't know how to talk to procurement. It's actually interesting because you know who does know how to talk to procurement? You do as a sales rep, and you can help them with that. You can help them understand what are the data concerns that they don't have time to worry about. And so that's, I think, another dimension where your expertise may not be in the medicine itself, although I'm guessing it is there too. But it's also an equally true, the way you can differentiate yourself is, what if you're the one sales rep that shows up to that surgeon and makes their lives easier by saying, look, here's the 3 people you need to talk to, and here's how to get them on board, because I know you don't have time for this. So let me see if I can make that easier for you. I've actually got a couple of thoughts, and let me stop and take a breath. And I got a couple more I could throw out there, but I think this one's really interesting in med device because hospital network systems in particular have become so complex that a lot of these purchase decisions on med devices are now being made with buying groups that have not only procurement, but like marketing officers and customer experience executives and data specialists and CISOs, whatever the heck a CISO is, right? A chief information security officer, right? So all that's new. And it's not just that, you don't necessarily know how to navigate that kind of stuff. You probably do, but your customer probably doesn't, at least not as well as they could or should. Or do you guys buy that? You live in this world every single day. Is that fair?
Yes. The customer landscape is continually getting more complex. The amount of information that they're able to take in is drastically more than it was, say, 10 years ago, even. And that creates a lot of issues you didn't necessarily have to deal with as a seller in the past. I'm starting to wonder, and I'd love your take, and if you're seeing any reality to this in your research, but with the expansion of access to information, I believe it's going to actually make a professional seller that much more important in the buying decision moving forward, because they're going to need somebody to help them sift through all of the noise. And I say professional on purpose. You're going to need somebody that's polished. They know what they're doing, right? They're a student of the game, and they're at the top, not just anybody. Yeah, I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so Clark, I'm with you. I think I've kind of been hinting at this. Let me just lay it out much more concretely. So I think I can imagine at least 4, probably 5 dimensions. There's probably even more, but 5 dimensions along which customers are going to struggle, where they don't really have the kind of expertise. It's like they're the customer. They know what they're doing. They know what to think. They've got it all figured out, and they really don't. So one we talked about is better ways to make money, save money, and particularly medical devices, efficiencies, productivity, and risk mitigation, right? So that's the challenger stuff. Then there's the navigating decision complexity, buyer enablement. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the one you just mentioned, which is information. So let's park that, come back to it in a second. Just to get them all on the table, 4 and 5 would be: 4 would be value, how to define value. So we could talk a little bit if you guys want. It's the world I live in now. And 5, less so for med device, maybe, but some parts of it would be implementation uncertainty. Like, how do I actually take this thing and install it and get full use out of it? So let's call it business strategy, decision processes, information, value definition, and implementation. I think those are 5 different dimensions along which your customer is going to struggle. So each one of those 5 dimensions opens up, let's call it surface area, for you to be the one sales rep who shows up to be helpful, as opposed to be just making things more complex. By the way, I have a name for this. So, Challenger is so much about what we called frame breaking and being a frame breaking sales rep and changing the framework of your customer's thinking. And I stand by that by and large. There's a whole nother riff on why that's less differentiable today, because everyone wants to be a thought leader. But I think really the opportunity to stand out today is less about frame breaking, more what I would call frame making, to put a framework around your business strategy, put a framework around your decision-making process. And so now, Clark, now let me come back to your question. One of the ways I can stand out is be the one sales rep who shows up and helps you just make sense out of just that overwhelming amount of not just information, but high quality information. Everybody's putting out, particularly, financial services and medical device, or pharmaceuticals and medicine in general, have such huge amounts of high quality information, and the information has to be high quality because you go to jail if it's not.
Yep.
Right. So when you're in a government regulated industry, like pharma, like med device to some degree, like financial services, you literally have to be accurate legally in what you claim, right? So as a result, there's not like, oh, this is the crappy white paper and that's the good one, right? It's like, no, they all have to be good or you go to jail, right? So everything is large. I mean, there's a baseline, there's better, but it's like ours goes to 11, sure, but everybody's at a 10, right? It's like, because you have to be. So everybody's got the white paper with the expertise and the double blind samples and the lab white, the white lab coats and all that kind of stuff. And I could bring out my expert and you could bring out your expert, and I could say, and at some point it just stops being helpful. It's just overwhelming. And meanwhile, I've got all these different suppliers out there who are trying to differentiate themselves desperately because it's such a commoditized world that they think the best way to show to differentiate myself as a company is to become a thought leader, right? It's like, if we could become a thought leader, there's not a CEO in the world, hasn't at some point in the last 5 years, said we need to be a thought leader in our industry. And they hire a bunch of experts and evangelists and God knows what else to pump out huge amounts of information. I call this the smartness arms race. And Clark, where it leads your, even very smart people who are time oppressed, like surgeons or just caregivers, it's just overwhelmed. And so now imagine if you're the sales rep, the sales professional shows up in that environment with like, hey, but have you read my white paper? It's like, go away. It's like, are you kidding me? That's like, here's a link to my website and maybe watch this video. It's like, I'd rather die. It's like, that's the last thing I need. It's not helpful. Stop bugging me, right? So if you're the sales rep or sales professional shows up in this environment and says, simply just acknowledges the challenge, there's a lot of information out there. Let me see if I can just help you make sense of it all. Here's the probably, of everything you want to read, here's probably the 2 or 3 things that are going to be the most helpful. Maybe this is from us. Maybe that one's from the competition, or maybe that one's from a third party, like the medical version of Gartner or whoever. But here's the 2 or 3 things you probably definitely want to read. As you read this material, we have found in working with other customers like you or other care providers like you, I love that phrase, by the way, in working with others like you, we have found ultimately it's probably these 3 questions you want to ask yourself. And notice I haven't given you the answers. I haven't told you read mine, not theirs. I haven't said this is the right answer. I've just said, here's the kinds of questions that you want to ask yourself as you engage in this small amount of information. What I've done is I've chalked the pitch or the field. I've put a framework around it. I've made it feel more manageable. And as a result, I'm like the one person who shows up in a helpful way as opposed to an overwhelming way. And it's literally the same principle as the buying dynamics before. It's like, here are the 3 people you got to get on board, and here's the 2 questions you're most likely to ask. Here's the 3 pieces of information you want to consider, and the 2 things you got to ask yourself as you go through those. And we could do the same with value. We could do the same with implementation. This is frame making. And I think frame making it's probably always been true, but in the world we live in today that is just so overwhelming with people and options and information and data, it's like freaking somebody just help me would be great. And that's it. What do you think, Clark? Do you buy that for $1, Clark? Come on, man. What do you think?
75 cents.
Wow. That's on discount today. That's pretty good.
Yeah, nice. That I like the pitch reference there. So my son plays a lot of soccer, and I noticed that it was fun. I'm curious.
Yeah, so in Europe, you don't chalk the field. In Europe, you chalk the pitch. So
yeah, exactly.
it's so I picked it up somewhere, and
I've learned more about that sport.
Just don't ask me to explain cricket to you, because I've sat in hotel rooms at 2 a.m. in London for more hours than I care trying to understand cricket, and I can't. Anyway,
so I'm curious.
Yeah,
what you're saying, I know it has a lot of people probably nodding right now as they're listening.
Yeah,
but there's also a lot of people in this audience that have honed their skills through the Challenger framework and the frame breaking framework, probably asking themselves, am I doing it wrong? Or where do these things meet together? Is it a 1-2 punch? Those are questions that are happening right now. How do you size that up?
It's a really important question. At Gartner and CB, we used to have a little 4-square because everything's a 4-square, right? And we could lay it out, and then the answer is always be in the top right. But I'm actually talking about the 4-square now. I'll see if I can do it off the top of my head. But just to be clear, Challenger, when we first wrote that, when we first did the research, it was 2000. 2008, believe it or not. We debuted the research in May of 2009, wrote the book a couple years later, 2011. One way or another, though, that's 12 years ago, right?
Yeah.
It's a long time. And it's not that it was right, now it's wrong. It's that's not what I'm really suggesting. What I'm suggesting is just the world today is just radically different than it was 12 years ago. And so you have to understand Challenger in context. And the context today is very different than it was 12 years ago. And I've already hinted at, so I won't belabor the point, but the context today is whether, everyone's a Challenger now. I don't think so, right? But many people read the book. But I think more importantly is this thought leadership dynamic, is that one way or another, virtually everybody's gotten on the bandwagon of content and said, and research and analysis and data, and marketers, God love them, have said, they've developed a whole strategy around this called content marketing, right? And then they went out and bought a bunch of tech called MarTech and created a strategy called marketing automation. And so, which is basically spamming the world at scale with all sorts of quote unquote insights, right? So it's not that, and so here's what happened. So I was in pre-pandemic. So this has been going on for a while. It's 2019. I was in Palo Alto, and we were talking about this very phenomenon. And there was a head of sales from a med device company there, and he said, "But Brent," that's literally what he said. He said, "Brent, I did what you told me to do." And it never ends well when someone says, "I did what you told me to do." It's like, oh God, what did I say now, right? But he said, so I read the Challenger. We built a commercial insight. It's a very good commercial insight. So while all of our competitors are out there telling the market they need to zig, we're out there telling the market you need to zag. We're challenging. So we're good, right? And I said, well, maybe. But I said, think about it from your customer's perspective, right? So your competitors are all telling your customer they need to zig, and they've got data, they've got evidence, they've got research, they've got content, and you're telling them to zag, and you've got data, you've got evidence, you've got research, you've got content. I said, if I'm the customer, all I really am now is just confused at a higher level. So 12 years ago, I was telling you to zig, and they were talking about product features. Do you see what I'm saying? So it was just different. It's like back then it was like, hey, my stuff is quicker, faster, shorter, longer, whatever. And I'm talking about your company. I was very different. But now if I'm talking about your company in zigging and they're talking about your company in zagging, that's a different dynamic. And so now the person that I think is really helpful is like, look, we think zigging is better than zagging, but here's why. But here's the best way for you to decide what's best for your company, whether it's zigging or zagging. Here's the 3 or 4 questions you want to ask yourself to figure out which way it goes. And I'm happy to help along that way. But again, it's this level of overwhelmedness that we see today that just wasn't the case 12 years ago. I think that's the difference.
It feels like the customer now could be excited about something and all the steps they have to go through, especially like you map out these 5 things to accomplish. It almost feels like the beginning to an Indiana Jones movie where, he's trying to get to the idol and he's got to cross the blowguns shooting darts, right, and swing over snakes and whatever it is. Right. So if we look at those 5 categories, and frame building, is there one where people just are absolutely destroying themselves, getting it wrong more than any of the others? Is it just this one like death trap that's crushing
a really good
them?
Question. The one that I think any one of them could be the thing that kills the deal, right? The customers getting lost inside their own decision-making process. Let me tell you quick where I'm leading to. I'm going to Zed is value. I want to talk a little bit about value because I think that's, at least for me, the one I've been thinking about the most lately because of the work we do at a company called Ecosystems, which is where I'm now at. But quick story in the buying process one, because they're all tied together. Because the heart and soul, the value story, and the heart and soul of the getting lost in your own buying process story kind of land in the same place, which is a group of stakeholders who haven't fully aligned on what they're trying to do, right? And so here's the quick story, and I'll come back to the value bit. So a lot happened in Palo Alto. This was also we used to do a lot of meetings at the Garden Court Hotel before they sold in the pandemic, which is in the heart of Palo Alto. And because it was California, there's a lot of med device companies out there. And so I have a lot of med device stories from Palo Alto for some reason. Sorry that you guys don't care about that. But anyway, it was a head of sales, med device, capital equipment. So this is a large investment. These are large machines, 6-7-figure deals, and particularly if you sell a group of those to a hospital system, now you're talking some 7-8-figure deals. And they were working on a deal with a hospital system, and it was, it was like $15 million. I don't know the exact number. It was a big freaking deal. And so their chief stakeholder that they always talked to, of course, was the chief medical officer of the hotel system, or the hospital system. And they've of course they'd done everything. And the whole thing of the CRO and his team in this case, was we need to differentiate ourselves from the competition. We need to show how we're going to save more lives with with greater efficiency, less downtime, with better cost structure to the hospital. And they'd done all that. So they'd won over this chief medical officer for the hospital system and shown that they were the better option. And the chief medical officer was bought in and essentially said, yes, he'd given a verbal, like, I want you guys. So they think this is a done deal. So they go to what they think is the final decision, the purchase decision with the buying group. And it's pre-pandemic, so it's in person, and they sit down in the hospital system, in the whatever headquarters building, whatever it is, and so the chief medical officer is there, but because it's the buying group, this chief procurement officer is there for the hospital network. But among other people, the chief marketing officer is also there, which I find it really fascinating that hospital systems have heads of marketing, but they do, and it's really interesting actually. So sorry, I've already gotten too long. So here's the punchline of the story: they lost the deal. They did not win that deal. It's an 8-figure deal up in smoke. But here's what's interesting. They didn't lose the deal to the competition. They lost the deal to a parking garage. So what happened during that meeting is that the chief medical officer made a very strong case that the single biggest problem they needed to solve at that hospital in that moment wasn't actually saving more lives, because they were saving a lot of lives already. And of course, it's always better to save more lives. But the most urgent thing they needed to address was the patient experience, because the hospital had a major parking problem. And as you guys know how this works, right? So you show up at the hospital and you dropped your loved one off at the urgent care or the emergency door, and you want to go in the hospital with them because you're in an emergent situation and they're like your loved one and you want to be by their side. And yet you got to spend the next half an hour driving around looking for a freaking parking spot. Are you kidding me? And so people were going to other hospitals. They were just like, the reputation of this place was a disaster. And so he convinced the senior team, that's our number one priority. And so this med device company lost to a parking garage. And it's a brutal story, but what it shows is like, I told this story just actually a couple of weeks ago in Denver to a head of sales in ERP, at high tech solutions, and he said, "Oh my God, this literally just happened to us 3 weeks ago with a very similar scenario." And I looked at him and said, "It's really tough to be your customer's number one solution to their number 3 problem, isn't it?" And he said, "It's exactly what happened. It's like we were their number one solution to their number 3 problem." And that brings us back to, so one is in buyer enablement. It's like, imagine if you were the one talking to that chief medical officer. Have you talked to the head of marketing yet? Because we find sometimes the head of marketing can have other priorities. And by the way, here's maybe what they're working on, and doing some of the research we've done, we know this is what she cares about. If you're having conversation, you might want to pull them in and get them on board. Here's the kinds of 3 things. Here's the 3 questions you might want to ask her as you pull her. And here's the data you want to show. Do you see what I'm saying? So I can guide you, I can coach you, I create a framework around the decision-making process. But the other one is around value. And I think this is where companies really struggle is, so I think, Zed, you asked me, like, what's the number one mistake, I think, or it wasn't exactly the question, but like, where does this really blow up? I think the thing that we tend to all do in sales right now is we show up with the value calculator, right? We show up with let me show you how much money I can make you, like through throughput of your hospital. Maybe that's something in med device, right? So that we would talk about, or we would say how much money I can save you by, reducing the staff necessary to do this particular procedure, how much time I can save is often productivity arguments made in med device, or maybe how many lives I can save, which is of course the grand heroic. But one way or another, we put together this calculation of like, lives saved, downtime eliminated, whatever it might be, efficiencies created. And we show up with this amazing value calculation, and it's kind of like when you show up and throw up with product, we show up and throw up with value, right? Like, here's the calculation. Look at all the money we could save you, or the money we can make, the lives we can save, whatever it is. And your customer looks and goes, eh. And you think, oh man, they're not buying our value. And then you got your boss beating you up saying, you've got to do a better job of demonstrating our value. It's like, oh, great. So I better go do a better calculation. And why don't I get some net promoter scores from similar companies or some raving fans who talk about it? And I'd have to tap into the community to give them a chance to talk to other companies that have bought this before. And what I've really come to realize is that the reason why I think companies struggle to really see your value is because they're not fully aligned on what they're trying to do in the first place, right? And this goes back to the parking garage story. So at a high level, a buying group has to align on 5 things. And there's other ways you could abstract this, but it's objectives. What are we trying to do? Tactics. How are we going to go do that? Metrics, which is what are we going to measure to see how we're doing against that tactic? Targets, how we know when we get there, and timeline. So objectives, tactics, metrics, targets, timelines. And unless your buying group is aligned across those 5 dimensions, objectives, tactics, metrics, targets, timelines, any value calculation you put in front of them is going to be suspect, because each one of those 5 dimensions or 5 altitudes creates surface area for disagreement. Oh, we're agreeing on the objectives, but I don't think we agree that having the world's best patients experience is the best thing to do. That's our objective. We agree on that objective, but you want to do it through saving lives. I want to do it through patient experience, different tactics. Or I want to save lives just like you want to save lives, but I want to do it in life saved versus, I don't know, I don't know what the life saved metrics might be, or like, what's the target? Like, I think a 2% increase, I think a 10% increase, or I think we should do this in 6 months versus 10 months. And if there's disagreement at any one of those levels and you show up with a value calculation that doesn't have that alignment as its basis, it's just going to be torn apart. And we think we need to do a better job of doubling down on demonstrating our value. I think what we need to do is do a better job of doubling down on helping that buying group align with each other around objectives, tactics, metrics, targets, timelines. I call that value framing. And the reason why this matters is because so many of us in sales were trained to do discovery, right? It's the first thing we're all trained in sales, right? It's like, go through a discovery process. And think about what that word means. Discover means to discover. It's to take the cover off, right? It's entdecken in German is so much better because it's literally to decover. And it's like, so the implicit assumption in the word discover is that your customer knows exactly what they're trying to do and how to get there. And all you have to do is take the cover off. All you have to do is reveal it and document it. And I think that's just not the case when you got a CMO who wants to, have better parking and a chief medical officer wants to save lives, and they can get alignment, but I can't just take the cover off. I take the cover off that, I find a can of worms, right? So the thing you got to do is not just to discover value. You've got to co-create value. You got to sit down with your customer and have a conversation around, and working with other hospital leaders like you, here's a couple different objectives that they're working on. Let's see if we can get alignment and make sure you guys are on the same page of what you're trying to do. And then we can talk about the tactics of how we're going to get there. And after that, we can define KPIs, metrics, and targets and timelines. Does that sound like a good thing to do? And I think that, as the guys, our friends at Palo Alto Networks is a big ecosystems customer of ours. One of them said to me the other day, it was really brilliant. He said, for us, the math is last. We don't lead with value, we lead to it. Just like going back, Clark, to the Challenger stuff. It's don't lead with insight, lead to, or don't lead with your company, lead to your company. Mm-hmm. Same with value. Don't lead with value, lead to value. And I think all of that is this framing around helping your customers get agreement on what they're trying to do in the first place.
I love that so much. I'm kind of giddy in my seat right now because what I'm hearing you talk about is actually the theory of constraint as it relates to psychological impact. So
I would have not gone. That's cool. Tell me more.
So if you look at those things, imagine we're talking about a manufacturing plant. Yeah. And you've got 5 machines and you manage each machine to produce the best out of that machine, but you don't take into account the actual throughput of the system. That's like doubling down on the value. And you're doubling down on machine 1, double. Now you have all this inventory sitting in front of machine 2. It bogs the system and you don't have as much throughput. What you've created an idea where let's not look at the individual machines. Let's look at the system as a throughput device. And let's make sure that we are aligned so that we are constantly putting out the best amount of inventory that the system can create. Not these individual, like, hey, here's the calculator. So I really like it.
So did you go to business school and have to read the book, The Goal? Do you remember that?
I did not go to business school, but it is one of my favorite books. Yeah.
It's literally, that's the whole book. Is it like the whole scouting trip going out through the woods and like put the slow guy in front, right? It's like, I just felt bad for that dude, but but that's such a great way.
What I heard you describe in the sense of getting people aligned first, as opposed to coming back, like calculator, because we've run into the calculator problem because we serve some different verticals of business at the company that puts this podcast on. And you could talk to someone about a 50% return on investment. And that sounds amazing.
Right.
You say that same calculator to a private equity backed organization that's looking at a multiple of EBITDA and they're getting a 5 multiple. Well, a 50% return on investment costs them a ton of money. That's like the worst idea on the planet.
Right. And that's, it's interesting because now, based on what you said, is like we can extract out of that sort of an insight and idea, which is value isn't absolute. Value is relative, right? It's contextual. And I think that's the thing is if I want to define value, I first have to define the context such that the value becomes clear. So we think that value generates customer confidence, but I think what value does is demonstrates customer confidence, if that makes sense, right? It's like, I've got to get them confident around what they're trying to do such that the value is an output of that confidence. Rather, we think it's like an input, like I'm going to show value and it's going to make you confident. Rather, it's like, I'm going to get you aligned and value is going to come out of that as an output of your confidence on that alignment. It's a 180-degree different way of thinking about value that I've learned since, because this is, for what it's worth, that is a shameless plug, but a good one is, this is what we do at Ecosystem. The software platform that we provide it creates a platform, an online environment where these kinds of conversations can happen. And as I've worked with our customers and in this world for the last year or so, this has been my aha. It's like, we have to think about value as an output as opposed to an input. And it flips everything in a really interesting way.
Yeah, that value is subjective. There's a bias called mental accounting, and it's this idea that you will divvy up money, right? And so I might go to a restaurant and spend $250 on two people to have a meal, and I really enjoy it, but I'm pissed off to pay $1.25 for a bottle of water. Right? That there is proof of subjective value, right? So
it's totally true.
They're
right?
both coming out later, and there's no, so
context is everything. Yeah, and I think this goes back again to some things, Clark, you were asking about, which is you have it in your potential role as a sales professional to be a co-creator of that context. In other words, you don't have to be a taker on context. You can be a maker, at least a co-maker, if that makes sense. But and I think it's just like Challenger, by the way. When you say these ideas out loud, this is what happened with Challenger early on. Is people would come up to me and say, "Brent, there's nothing new in this book." They'd be kind of mad about it, but they say, "There's nothing new in this book. Our best people are doing this already." And I always said, somewhat with a like, it was glib, but it was also true. It's like, no, we know your best people are doing it already because it wouldn't have shown up in the research unless your best people were doing it already. That's literally how the data works. But but I think that's the same thing around, like, if you think, well, my best people are already doing this context creation, it's like, I know, and that's why they're your best people. Right? And this is like, if we could define this and bottle it and export it to everyone else, then we'll be on a podcast 3 years from now talking about the next thing to differentiate yourself, because this one's run its course too. But for right now, it's the window of opportunity, I think.
Distilling this down, if you don't help them frame their perspective, it's framed for their perspective is framed without you. So if you don't have any input, it's going to be framed. So you better have some input in how the value comes out, right?
I think so. I'm only hesitating, Clark, because I think there is one other option, which is that they struggle to find a frame and ultimately they choose not to choose, right? So lacking any sort of clarity of confidence around their framework, they give up, right? And this is, I know you guys have talked to Matt Dixon and in the work that he just published with Ted McKenna, which is both friends and colleagues, former colleagues and good friends of mine. But the Jolt effect is great. The one thing I would add to that, though, and it picks up, Clark, on your point. So Matt and Ted they like to talk about not FOMO, but FOMO. So it's not fear of missing out, but fear of messing up. Yep. And I think they do that just because it's such a good tagline. When I first heard it, it's like, oh, damn, that's good. I really like that. But to be fair to them, I think they would agree with what I'm about to say. But the one thing about FOMO, fear of messing up, is just definitionally the way that's expressed is through the lens of fear, right? And I think in many cases, customers are indecisive because they fear messing up. But I think a lot of times customers fail to make a decision because they're just exhausted, or they're just confused, or like, oh my God, it's like, hey, how about this? Why don't we all go out tomorrow and buy a CRM system? How about this? I'd rather die. You know what I mean? It's like, just the complexity of, like, so much of what I talk, again, especially in med device, and especially when you're talking to surgeons. We did a lot of work for a while, probably about 10 years ago now, with Edwards Life Sciences, right? So they sell heart valves, right? So we're talking heart surgeons, some of the most self-confident people in the world. They crack people's chests open for a living. At least they used to. I think there's robots for that now, right? You can go up through your leg or some crazy thing like that now. But I mean, like I have to be confident, or at least at the very least, I have to at least let people believe that I'm confident, because your life is literally in my hand. Like, literally your beating heart is in my hands, right? And so I don't know that so when you talk to someone like that and say, hey, could you maybe go down and talk to the procurement department about why Edwards is better than these other two choices. By the way, the other two choices are equally good, because if they didn't actually also save lives, they would be out of business, right? So do you see what I'm saying? Like the baseline level of performance, like everybody goes to 10, right? It's like so like ours goes 11. So in that world, what they found at Edwards, this is a while since I've done this story out loud, so bear with me as I stumble a little bit. But it's not that the chief of surgery was scared to go talk to procurement. He was more like, I don't have time for that bleep. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm over here saving lives. You want me to go talk to, like, that's 3 floors down and they're penny pushing rubber pencil pusher. I don't have time. I'm too good for that. They wouldn't say that out loud, but that's not fear-based. That's more like, oh, I don't have time for this base. Do you know what I mean?
Exhaustion.
Exactly. Right. And so I think Matt, if he were here on this podcast with me, right, he'd agree. So I want to be fair to Matt and Ted on the jolt effect, but I think that's the lens I'd put these things through. Isn't just like we need to turn down the fear. I think what we really have to is, sorry for the Staples metaphor, we have to hit the easy button, right? It's like we have to just find ways to, how can we help our customers feel like they can do this? It's not exhausting. It's not annoying. It's not scary. I would put fear in there. I just wouldn't just limit it to that. It's like, just make this feel possible, doable. Help me feel confident in myself to go navigate this, to buy this, to get this agreement on this, to see the value in this, to implement this effectively. That, I think, if I tell CEOs and heads of sales, whoever I can talk to these days, like, put everything through the lens of customer confidence. But it's not their confidence in you, your product, or you as a trusted advisor. It's their confidence in themselves and their ability to make those kinds of decisions on behalf of their company. Solve for that, and good things happen, I think.
It's interesting because what the things you're describing, taking mental load off, decision fatigue that lots of people are dealing with, those things, it can feel squishy, but our brain literally uses, I believe it's at least 20% of our energy. It's enormous consumer of our body's energy. And so when things are on overload and people are stressed already, both personally, professionally, in this economic time, folks are being asked to do more with less in their jobs right now. There is that stress, and people redline even easier. So it sounds like to me, you're saying, be a resource to help them see the value, in which leads to buying you. And everything doesn't happen in a vacuum. They may not even like Bob or Judy in procurement, right? So you're adding a layer of stress there because they don't even get along.
In fact, this is like, if someone asked me like what I want my Christmas stocking, it's a couple $100,000 to go do some research, because I think and I've got the team lined up to do it too. It's like we are actually out shopping this around and looking for funding because I think the research that needs to be done is something we just touched on barely at CEB, even before the Gartner acquisition, around what we called identity value. And it's the individual psychological needs of those stakeholders and why they might even be willing to engage in that process of consensus creation in the first place, right? So one of the hypotheses we tested back then, which was borne out in our research, was really interesting, is it's like I said to our team one time, I said, I would bet that there's cases, and the parking garage story is a perfect example. I would bet there's cases where someone is, or the Edwards Life Science, even a better example, where someone is willing to buy your solution. No, I want your solution. It's like, you had me at hello. It's like, I see your value. Like, I can see the use cases. I want it. But you want me to go talk to that person, that person, that person, that person. I'm not willing to do that. Right. So I call that willing to buy, but not willing to fight. And fight, some people didn't like the fight term because they thought it was too militaristic. But it's like, but I think what I need to figure out now is not just what makes me willing to buy your solution, but what makes me willing to go engage in the exhausting process of aligning everyone else and getting them on board and figuring out the hoops I got to jump through. Oh my God, I'd rather die. Right. So there's going to be certain things that will motivate me to do that. And what we found in our early version of this research is those things that would motivate me to do that aren't business value. It's good for my company. It aren't even professional value. Help me be more efficient. They are dimensions of what we called identity value, which this will help me earn more respect. This will help me elevate my status. It was about my perceptions of me. And this is where it gets really interesting. There's some deep psychological stuff. But I think, Clark, to your point, if we really want to understand commerce today, in these big complex buying groups and this overwhelming amount of complexity, we have to collectively better understand these individual psychological needs, and nobody's touched this stuff yet. That is a whole universe waiting to be studied. And I think that's the new frontier.
Yeah, you nailed it. If you're
Cool.
asking somebody to go
Yeah.
do more work for you, and they're willing to give you
Right.
some money, but they don't want to go do all the extra legwork, right?
Yeah. 100%. And just
It
showing up with like,
literally,
but look how much money I could save you is insufficient, is
who cares?
dramatically insufficient in that world. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, you're asking your customer to go be Indiana Jones going through,
right.
the booby traps, as opposed
Right.
to be the guide, take a couple shots to the shoulder.
It's crazy. It's so much we don't understand about all this, right? But for me, I think, Zed, picking up on your point, that last bit there is so deeply human, and it's now we're into deep worlds of the deep into the world of human psychology and self-perception of human relations and things like Cialdini talks about in influence and that I think is, we've only just begun to scratch the surface on that kind of stuff. And because in a world that we used to live in, where I find the head of surgery and sell to him or her and win him or her over, and they do the deal and we're done, maybe it was nice to have, but it wasn't need to have. In a world now where that head of surgery has to go talk to 5 other people, win them on board, and they've got competing priorities, and it's exhausting, and I'm overwhelmed with information, and I don't know what to do, that this kind of stuff becomes critical, and none of us understand it right now.
This is fascinating.
Isn't that cool?
It is.
Love
It's
it.
very cool. You're reminding me
Yeah.
of a conversation we had with an orthopedic surgeon, Vinod Dasa, on this show, Cali, a long time
Probably
ago.
2 years,
And
yeah.
he was walking through the reality that if you want him to go push for you as a new partner, you've also got to be at the top of his list, because he's only got so much capital, so much
Yeah.
political capital, if you will, that he can extend and go, some poker chips he can turn in.
That's
so
right.
You add that layer in there, much less the want to and the ability to. Do they have the equity to go cash in?
100%. And this goes back to Cialdini stuff. So Robert Cialdini, who wrote the book Influence, brilliant scholar on this stuff. And he talks about this idea of what he calls a value exchange. And a value exchange is, I will give you something in turn of something in return for something you've given me a value. And but what's interesting is where it can get kind of abstract, but in really cool and interesting ways. So for example, and some of it is unspoken. It's not unconscious, but subconscious, right? So if I help a customer feel more confident, a customer being a person, if I can help you feel more confident in yourself, I've given you something of value, right? I feel better about myself when I interact with you. I feel more confident in my ability to navigate my organization, to find out whatever it is. I will return that favor to you with that extra mile to maybe go talk to that person, to do something a little beyond my comfort zone, or something that's a little extra work. It's and all this is unspoken. That's what's so interesting about it. It's human physics. This is like the basis of friendships and successful marriages, right? You really sit down and think about your best friends. More often than not, I would imagine your best friends are people that, if you really think about it, are the people that just make you feel better about yourself when you're around them. I like me when I'm around you, right? That's like, I would imagine you find that at the heart of 90% of successful marriages. I like me when I'm around you. And there's a version of that exists in sales, I think. And we're just, that in some ways it feels like it's going back 100 to 200 years of sales, like back to the beginning of this stuff. But this is where I'm geeking out right now.
What's silly is companies, me included, we add complexity. So not only are the salespeople having to help them navigate the complexity that exists on their side, but then as the sales organization, because we have that curse of knowledge, just going, well, yeah, just have them sign the thing and we'll do the demo and then we'll show up with the thing.
Right.
And,
right.
And
exactly.
Then you create ambiguity. I mean, I've made this mistake where I'm like, look, it's so cool, you should do it. And in my mind, I'm 100% correct. And I probably am correct overall, but I just was horrible at communicating it. I forget.
That's right.
Quote. I think
you're correct in the abstract, but you're not correct in the context.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
That's it. Right. And this is why so much, it's kind of like where we started this conversation. Now let's take a full circle is, the customer, we're trained to think the customer's always right, but more often than not, the customer's struggling to figure out what's right. Or I don't know if they're wrong per se, but they're struggling. And we've talked about that now at least, I don't know ad nauseum, but we've talked about it a lot. But there's a parallel story to that, which is 99% of what I found in our research tends to be the way to win is to be as supplier agnostic as possible. So there's this knee-jerk reaction. We always want to talk about us. It's like, do you like us? Do you see the value in us? Do you believe in us? Do you trust us as a trusted advisor? Do you see do you understand our features and benefits? And so much of what we're talking about here is not having a conversation with your customer about us. It's having a conversation with the customer about them. It's taking and Challenger is a good example of this. The whole idea of don't lead with, but lead to, right? Don't lead with who you are, lead to who you are. And I think that same theme has shown up every single way that we've studied customer buying over the last 20 years. There's some version of take you out of the story. And Zed, it's just, but all of us are so inclined to think like the only way to get customers to buy our stuff is to get them to understand our stuff, to get them to see the value of our stuff, to get them to see the difference of our stuff. So we did like lean into our stuff. And it's so funny because and I get it. I totally get it. I think it's dead wrong.
Brent, I really appreciate you joining us today. I think this has been a fascinating discussion.
Absolutely.
I know that people are going to be fired up thinking about building frames. Where can someone find out more about what you're doing now?
Absolutely. Well, so I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest place to find me. If what I said about ecosystems and our value platform struck a chord for anyone, I'd love to at least start up a conversation, talk to you about that. And if it didn't, that's okay too. For what it's worth, at Eco, I put out a weekly video episode. We call it Brent's Breakdown. A colleague of mine named it. She has no idea how close she came to the reality on that one, but that's a different story. But so it's literally, it's like 20 years of knowledge. I just put in like 5-6 minute videos and put them up once a week. Tomorrow's video, they come out on Thursdays. Tomorrow's video is on something called the Kano model. Last week's was on something called empathy-led selling. It's like every week I just like, what do I talk about this week? So by the way, I don't know what the over-under is on when I run out of ideas. I'm on episode 35 right now. So it's only a matter of time before I completely run out of ideas. But we put those on LinkedIn and on YouTube. It's called Brent's Breakdown. Check those out there. Just reach out and say hi on LinkedIn. That's usually where I hang out.
Awesome. We'll put a connection to your LinkedIn in the show notes, a connection to the website, and then also to that YouTube channel. So it's easy access for everybody.
Oh, and there's one other thing. At Eco, we've developed, I should have led with this. We've actually created a community of, so any sales professional, customer success, value professional, you name it, who's interested in this idea of customer value and how to demonstrate it. We've created what we call the customer value community. We have over 2,000 people in it. And I'll send you guys a link. You can put that on the notes too. It's off our website at ecosystems.io.
That's perfect.
Nice.
Awesome.
Rock on.
Well, for listeners, visit medicalsalesaccelerator.com. While you're there, download a resource on how to communicate better with your customers. Sign up for the email so you know about upcoming episodes. And also you can suggest a guest or topic.
If you found value in today's episode, do a few things for us. Leave us a review, drop some 5 stars. We love the 5 stars. Subscribe to the podcast so you do not miss an episode. And please send it to your friends, your family, your mama and your daddy. We greatly appreciate it. Brent, this was a pleasure. I've been a big fan of your work for a long time, and it's made impact in my career. Thank you for joining us. Make it a great week, everybody.